Well, according to my notes and calculations, it's now 10:30 on Thursday, and that means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council in Brookings, South Dakota. This is an interactive program, just to remind those of you who have been here before and the new people who maybe haven't joined us before. And what that means is that we are going to be having a conversation with our guest. However, it's really about an interactivity. It's about an exchange of ideas. So we invite you to ask questions. We invite you to also to make comments or talk with each other about the subject. We like to stay on the subject. Uh, and we like to think of this as a safe space for you to exchange ideas, get clarity on information, and maybe just as important, to have practice in having a conversation that expresses maybe a different point of view, but in a safe space. So that's at least what we like to do, and so far it's worked pretty well. So thank you for joining us, and I will ask you to think for a moment about the food that you eat and where that food comes from. How does it get to you? And if you are living on a reservation, to think about the quality of food that you eat and that's available to you. And if you're in one of the far-flung reservations, which is, can be miles and miles from a reliable grocery store that has reliable food, then I'd like you to think about that for a moment. And then there's one more level. There's a level of wholesome food. It's one thing to just have food, but my observation is that in many stores, even in larger cities, the quality of vegetables, fruits, and we almost have no nuts, unless they're in, shelled in a package, and things like fish, you know, can be, let's say, leave something to be desired. And you may not recognize that if you grew up all the time and that was kind of like how vegetables look, wilted and stuff like that. It might not be a thing. But if you've ever been to a place or a store that has vegetables that are fresh, or at least reasonably fresh, and if you've ever been at a place where the fish actually tastes like fish, then you can recognize that, it can be kind of difficult to find good, wholesome food sometimes, especially in the off season when it's not like midsummer or something. Farmers markets are a good place to go and get that. But lacking a farmer's market, it can be tough. And if you're on a reservation, it can be immensely tough. So today we're going to be having a conversation with Nick Hernandez. And Nick is from the Makoce Agricultural Development Program. And he's going to be talking to us about the efforts that they're making to bring fresh food to the reservation and to sort of close that food loop. So welcome, Nick. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, good morning, actually. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Nick, first, let's find out a little bit about who you are. Where did you come from? How did you sort of like move into the position that you're in now?
My name is Nick Hernandez. I'm the president and CEO of Makoce Agriculture Development. We are a grassroots, place-based nonprofit organization based on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, my home reservation, my homelands. I reside here with my two sons, Ailey and Kai, and then my partner, Liz. Also, but we live on our historic family land, allotted land here on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which I was born and raised here, and and moved back to after graduating from college, from Fort Lewis College back in the day, I should say, back in 2006. And I guess the question, right, is how did we come to be in this position of this work? But for me, after doing my stint basically of my undergrad education, was this motivated, excited, just graduated from my undergrad, came back home and wanted to change, wanted to create change within my community. But a lot of my work, a lot of my energy was attributed to my grandparents and my parents for motivating me, right, to go get my education and come back and create change for my community. And so, I did that. I went and got my undergrad education, and I learned about the studies of, humanities and sociology and Native American cultures and literature, and then came back home. But the motivating light bulb to all of the work that has come up to date actually stems from a conversation that I had with my late grandmother, Roberta Ironcloud, in her garden, actually, after graduating from college. And the conversation that we were having was, because we would always have these back and forth conversations of, you know, complaining or looking for ideas and solutions and looking for ways to develop things within our community, right, within our homelands. And so in the garden, I think it was like in July of 2016, after graduating, I was uh, I was helping to harvest these fruits and vegetables out of her garden. And it was a small garden, probably no more like 20 by 30, 20 by 20 garden, just a basically a vegetable garden, a fruit and vegetable garden. And we were just having a conversation, and she was handing me, cucumbers and tomatoes, and we were just sitting there. Our favorite fruit we would indulge in would be a pear tomato. So that's the fruit I attribute my relationship with my grandmother, is a small pear tomato. But we were having this conversation, and I was holding all of these fruits and vegetables in my hands, and talking about, oh, I want to create things. I want to develop change. Like, I want to look for ways to be more involved with my community. And the light bulb went off as I was holding these fruits and vegetables. The light bulb went off, and I said, "This is what I want to do." I was looking at these fruits and vegetables, these peppers and cucumbers and tomatoes, and I said, "This is what I want to do. I want to reconnect back with my food, and do that in a way that affects my community through education, through training, but also reconnect back to the land of which these things were being harvested." Because there's a lot of teachings that I, right, in my generation, and those, before or after, were disconnected from. And so a lot of like light bulbs started to go off. And the question, and then I asked my grandmother, can you teach me these ways that you're showing me? I'm holding them at face value. And she stood up and she said, "Turn around." And I turned around, and she's like, look out in the field. And so I turned around, looked at this field, and where we live now actually was like this crop field. Basically, I think we were raising oats or something like that at the time. But she's like, "Grandson, you have access to 40 acres. You have access to 40 acres to do whatever you want, and I support you for whatever you want to do. But the thing about it is that I can't teach you how to do these things that you want to do. You actually have to go and do it, learn from it." And that was the motivated factor, that summer July day, to go out and learn about these things, especially around food and soil, and about culture, and all these things that tie into soil. And I went off, and after that, I tilled my own garden, planted my own garden, and ever since that summer day, have continued to be invested into learning about food by doing the work. And so I attribute the light bulb idea, the passion towards reconnecting myself and my community towards what real food is. What real food is for not only my community, but everybody, right? And being able to share that in models and ideas and designs. But it stemmed from that conversation I had that summer day with my grandmother, who passed on, who has passed on. But I attribute that origin to the organization and the work from having that conversation and that light bulb and that opportunity to share that moment with my grandmother.
Talk to us a little bit about the situation that you're trying to address as far as like what is the situation with food, not just in your reservation, but also in the homelands of natives across the state. What's the situation now as you see it?
Yeah, well, I mean, to add to it, it's more of the demographics, right? So I'm a tribal member of the Oglala Sioux tribe, a ancestral and citizen of the Ocheti Shakoi, which basically is the nation, right? And so as we navigate through history, right, as we navigate through understanding history, um, our reservations have been designed to be these structured basically encampments that have basically dissolved and divided, or I should say divided the nation of the Ocheti Shakoi. And so right now we have 47 sub-band communities spread across like the upper Great Plains. And so, but within these encampments, right, were designed structures, basically historical federal policies, right, to eliminate the indigenous Native American community through basically warfare of dismantling the food system. Okay, so all the work that basically accumulates to what we're doing today is structured, is understood through historical acts and policies in relationship to the federal governments. And so coming to date, right, and understanding the many acts, the many policies that have been put in play to how we live, how we operate, how we access, how we develop, how we create, is structured around federal policies, which relatively are identified as Code of Federal Regulations, right? And so these are monstrous codes that basically navigate how you operate the federal government in general. And so as a sovereign nation, we also have to understand those policies. And so as we get up into modern times and understanding where we live at to date, I can say that that through this transition, right, through these general transitions of these federal policies and acts, that we live on a reservation that has been dismantled for the food systems that used to exist, right, to the economies that used to exist, both within social, both within cultural, both within economic, not by the dollar, but within the transactions of goods, right, of valuables, of things that communities thrive, lived off of, but that had a meaningful relationship. And food is the foundation of all of that. And I can say that's a foundation of all of that for human existence, because without food, right, without proper food, nutritious food, without clean water, without clean soil, right, our health and our wealth start to diminish, and we don't really truly understand that. And so coming to modern times with the reservation, we have 2.8 million acres of land on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. So a population size of about somewhere between 20 and 25,000 who live, work, go to school, operate, create businesses on the reservation. And so through through federal acts and systems, right, that need to be developed, we live on a reservation that has 4 grocery stores. And majority of those grocery stores don't have nutritiously dense foods. We have 10 convenience stores. And convenience, right? You go to a convenience store, right? And you have packaged and highly processed snacks and foods and sugary drinks and salts. And so we have more of those than we do have grocery stores and delis. And this is kind of the same, right, on most underserved communities. Um, and we can speak to many of those populous areas of those. But for here, we've done the studies. We know that 95 to 99% of our food is actually shipped onto this reservation, right? And those shipped foods, right, go into our 20 or 29 educational institution schools, the casinos or other businesses that utilize these food products, but we don't know like how far those foods actually travel. They could be anywhere from 100 miles to roughly 5,000 miles, right? We don't know, because the thing that we stress on is that we are totally disconnected from our foods and our food systems, and we've seen that through the global pandemic even more. And so for here, in being able to understand and see, right, that not only are we disconnected from our food, but a lot of our food is shipped on, and so shipped onto our reservations. We are seeing the health impacts related to the things that we have access to. So the things that you have access to affect your health, affect your wealth, right? Affect your well-being. And so when the thing I don't like to stress on is the negativity, but when you do like, and the thing we as an organization don't stress on is the negativity that circulates how we live, is that we have high rates of, right, diabetes, health disparities and stuff, but those are all attributed to the things that we have access to. And the inaccessible things are the things that will help change, right? Change the mindsets, change the factors, change the health disparities. And what we are trying to do as an organization is to not only change the mindsets, but actually develop, right, the things that I held in my hand to make those a reality, even larger, for not only our community, but as models, right? That be like, we can build these things and we can showcase these and we can learn from these, but we have to do it from a grassroots lens, from a grassroots movement, because a lot of things that come and get developed on most underserved communities are outside things, right, that were constructed from tables to say, hey, let's build that and we'll be able to change, right, those disparities, those economic factors. And that's never worked. We know that through history. And so what we're trying to do is to develop our own systems, our own models that are relevant to our identity, our culture, our community, our economics, that more align, right, with creating food sovereignty, food security, food justice. And so we exist, right, as a community fabric of movement towards developing ourselves and being the change that we need for us within our community. So I think hopefully I answered the questions, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I wanted to get a little bit deeper into the actual nutritional issues, if you can make some, specifics about the kinds of food. You did mention where the food is coming from, but give us some examples of the kind of let's say less than dense nutritional values and the kind of food that people are eating now. That it should be mentioned that the food that you eat, especially for young people, that goes directly to their ability to grow their brains and bodies. And so it's not just, well, I'm hungry or not hungry. You can find something to fill your stomach and turn off the ghrelin that stops making you feel like you're hungry. But if you're not getting the nutritions and micronutrients and stuff that you need, you're still starving to death, even if you're fat, you
Oh,
know?
definitely.
Yeah. So can you talk to us a little bit about the kinds of foods that are available, used, and compare them to the kind of foods that you guys are trying to bring into the food system?
Yep. So like the foods, well, relatively, the foods that I grow up or that we see a lot of younger generations growing up is the foods that you have access to. And so we're talking about more, more carbohydrates in relation to like pastas, right? So pasta, so things that have sugars, and things that are more sugary and more sugary than nutritious. And so just like when you go into a lot of the grocery stores, you have aisles, right, of all of these high fat, high sugars, right, highly processed foods that you can look at a label and there's 50 ingredients to these things. And those for the dense, right, for the density of what exists within our store shelves,
Mm,
do have those. Like we have more chips, probably more chips, more sodas, more pizzas, right? More ready, highly processed foods, right? Access to sugary. So you're seeing the breads and everything on the store shelves. And that's across the board. And that's in and out of convenience stores where convenience, right, is more of your sugary drinks and your candies and everything. And so when we talk about nutrition, like there's no real nutrition in there. And the thing that you just talked about is malnutrition, right?
mm,
In doing the research and understanding and working with doctors, to basically understand the health disparities, we understand that there's levels of malnutrition also. I mean, there's like the A, B's, and C's.
mhm,
And a lot of our communities suffer from those rates of nutrition because you can have all the food, you can have all the food products, right, that you want, but you'll suffer from different disparities, nutritional disparities. And having access to these highly processed food products is what creates those disparities. And so what we want to do, right, is to take control. And just like any other community or any other, they want to have access to the foods, right? Especially understanding the nutritional density that we should be consuming, but that shouldn't be across the board, right? We shouldn't be, ideally, communities of people shouldn't be fed the same, right, formalized nutrition across the board, um, that actually it doesn't interact with with both the environment, both the cultural, and both the personal and the nutrition, because it also creates more disparities, right?
mm,
Because you have different illnesses or ailments that across the board you don't really see or understand. So you're looped in this category of same consumption. And so what we were trying to do is not only understand, right, the effects of food, but the accessibility. We've done like food system scans. So we know that we have these grocery stores. We know that these foods come in. We know how much, right, ideally how much food comes in. But we also have been, washed, right, to say that we live in poverty, right? We've been displaced or disconnected from these systems, and so there's systems that have been implemented. Like here, you need a grocery store, you need a convenience store, right? But we've never been, and that's across the board. We've never been taught about what nutrition means to us and what does that formula actually look like to us within the environment we grow up in the families, in the genetics, and all this kind of stuff. And also the historical factors of what historically our ancestors actually grew up on and what a healthy diet looks like to ourselves. And so what we are wanting to do is to not only understand what exists, right, within the food system that exists in modern times, but also in the traditional sense of the traditional foods that 2 generations ago, roughly, or 3 generations ago, our people, our families grew up on. And those were the most, I mean, I can see pictures of my grandfathers, my great grandfathers, and they were like 6'5", right? 160 pounds of muscle. And then zoom in today, I'm 5'11", 250 pounds, and you know, and suffering, or looking at the health impacts of my community members suffering from high rates of diabetes, right? High rates of mental illnesses, high rates of whatever health disparities, but we can attribute that to actual food consumption, right? And being disconnected from relatively the food oasis that we live in. We live in a food oasis, and I want to stress that we actually live in a food oasis. There's buffalo, right? There's free range cattle, we have deer, we have elk, we have turkey, but
Mm,
we've been disconnected from them. And so as
right,
we navigate through developing food systems and understanding what food actually is, we want to create those connections by harvesting those animals, by
right.
understanding the ecosystems through which they live and which they provide that benefit us in that relationship to nutrition, to food. Um, and so that's kind of where we're at here. We
Right,
understand, right? The
right.
sciences, the modern understanding of food, but
Mm,
now, and how it affects us, but
mm,
also we're working towards reconnecting ourselves back to the food oasis, back to the more the more the more natural understandings of how we should be operating as a human population,
mm,
from a
right.
grassroots window that we want to share out with everybody also.
Well, I want to get back to this conversation, and because there's much more under the hood of all the things you were just talking about. But I want to open it up to our esteemed panel here and ask them if you guys have any questions, comments, uh, things that are not clear to you, your experience with a food oasis or a food desert. Uh, any questions or comments?
Nick, what does getting started look like for a community? Like I live in Gregory, so we also have food shipped in to us and oftentimes find those fresh, produce items that you get at home and it's full of mold and you're ending up, tossing it out anyway and not eating it. So I'm just curious. How we get started with the community and getting the community on board to help you with a project to try to make, what's the best way to do that, or where do you start for that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question, because it leads me back to how we actually started. And the first system that we developed, right, for understanding local food access was not was actually in for us was harvesting buffalo, right? Or harvesting a local animal, because as we navigate through ourselves understanding what food is, we have to create that connection, because we don't know where food comes from. And what we need to do is actually create that relationship to where this comes from. And that's not only in creating gardens, it's raising other animals to create a consumable food, right? And we have to do that by actually doing it, because we know generationally, 2 generations ago, families were raising their own chickens, right? For eggs and meats, or they're raising rabbits or goats or sheep or whatever. They created that relationship. And so how we started, well, I should say how we started in my family, was not only having a garden, but my sons were raising chickens at basically 2 and 4 years old. And so we participated in the program that we created of raising meat bird chickens. And so we designed this whole system. Basically, it was about $1,200 back then, but it was this training class. You took this training class and you understand how to humanely raise animals, but also to understand soil, um, to understand how to feed, how to take care of these animals. And within 55 days of building this relationship of how to raise these food, we harvested these animals, right? And that that mindset totally flipped, because being disconnected from your food is that you can see a truck, right, bring food like products in, but in interacting with foods, that totally change your mindset. Because what triggered for me was, me and my sons were raising this food, and we cooked this first chicken, and we plated it, right, and we were looking down like, oh, we're going to consume this first piece of this chicken, this protein that we raised, that we took care of, right? And we're consuming it, and it totally flips everything. It totally flipped everything for our family. And so we created this relationship with our food. And so within doing that, we expanded this program, which we call the Regenerative Poultry Producers Program. And now we work with 28 families across our reservation to implement this strategy, this design plan to raise 75 birds on their own home property, right? And then they have to harvest those. But they take this 8-week class that is structured, that is designed to educate around humane acts of raising, feeding, watering, sheltering, protecting, and then also harvesting, packaging these animals. And so what I would say for communities who want to engage in what local food looks like, it's taking these models and implementing them, right? And we have a mobile processor. We have this mobile processor, which is the game changer for any community. But even before that, we were hand plucking chickens, right? We invested in, like, I don't know what it was like $1,000 in this scolder and plucker, and we came together as families, as communities. We hand harvesting and feathers until we accessed this mobile harvester, and it totally changed, because it went from hand harvesting more manually. So now we can create commercial like products for our communities, and on a growing factor. But what I would say is, for communities to be involved is not the idea of creating community gardens to create community gardens. It's the idea of creating space to educate, to train, to develop, right, entrepreneurship, but also to be able to take those steps needed for supply chain access. Because we see supply chain as more of a national thing, when now we need to bring it back down to the grassroots and say, hey, let's raise, let's process, let's package, let's storage, let's store, let's understand what storage, let's distribute, and let's create that local, let's create that local supply chain circle that we all need within our communities, because that will help us to interact, engage, educate, and be able to create community. Because that's how you create community, is actually through food. Because the food is the factor in all cultures, right? In all societies. Because that's what you relate to. I can share a piece of meat with you, or a different vegetable, and you'll build that fiber, right? That not only opens up a portal from your younger years in the relationship that you built, but also you're creating new fibers with other friends and relatives at a shared understanding. And so that's how you create, that's how you develop those systems and implement those systems, but that's how you create community.
And so if I'm understanding you, it's a kind of a feedback loop. You start getting people to do the let's say the low hanging fruit, the things that's easy to do, and then you build on that. You expand that, the things that you're doing. Maybe you go start with chickens. They can eat the worms or whatever's on the ground, and then you keep building your systems and add on to it.
And I
If
guess
I'm
it could be anything, because the other factor that we did is that we built an apple orchard. I have 16 trees right outside the house, right?
mm,
And the reason why the apple orchard exists is because we had to travel over 400 miles to go to an apple orchard. And I said, well, let's just build our own. And so we
mm,
built our own. And so it's just these different factors, right, of what you are interested in, right?
mm,
What you are passionate about. And that with that passion, you want to share that out.
mm.
oh, I like fruits and vegetables, or I like vegetables. I like raising animals, right? I like preserving, right? I like these different things. Well, you can come and you can share those. And so and that's our intent for a lot of our work, is to highlight what community members like and bring them in to share those passions. Because to do the work that we do in agriculture, in food systems, it's not a day-to-day job. It's a thing that you have to be passionate about. And so let's take those passions and let's share them out, right, on many platforms.
But what's interesting to me about what you're explaining is that when other people see you doing something, that's probably the most powerful way that you can say, yeah, you can too, or why don't you do it? Is like when they see you do it, as opposed to if you just show up at their front doorstep and talk about it. It's different than when, hey, Nick is doing that. What are you doing over there, Nick? And then when they actually see that you have a whole bunch of apples, then you say, and then people start to ask you, well, how do I do that? And especially kids, when they see you're growing an apple tree, it's amazing how, hey, can I do that? Yeah, you sure can. And here's how you're going to do it. And then if one kid does it, their friends are probably going to want to do it too. And then pretty soon you have like a community tradition of like the one guy may do the apples, another guy may do chickens, another guy might do mushrooms or whatever. But then if you put all that together, everything you grow yourself is something you don't have to buy from the outside. Am I following you, or am I just going on my own trip here?
No, I mean, those are all the passionate things. But yeah, those are also the systems that we can educate and train to, but also we're building new systems that didn't exist, right? The poultry program for that we operate didn't exist 4 years ago, right? Before that, I was doing 500 egg layers, producing 100,000 eggs a year. 20,000 dozen eggs, right? So things like the model systems. So you want to build square foot model systems that you understand, but that you can take, that you can keep expanding. But it's a system that, well, how'd you do that? Well, this is how I did it. I planted 4 trees 4 years ago. My plan is to plant 2 trees every year. So you make that commitment and you keep doing that. Same with chickens. Oh, I started off with 75. Oh, I know I can do 150. Oh, I know it can do, keep adding from there. And so it's being able to take something as small as planting a tree or raising a chicken to be able to expand that thought and that opportunity, and just to give somebody a small understanding of how you started too, because it's not, well, I want to go and buy a farm, right? I want to go and buy a ranch. Well, nobody has millions of dollars to invest in that startup. Let's start off small. If I tell you you can raise 55 bird or 75 birds with a 10 by 12, 2 foot high tractor, and you invest in the processing equipment, right? Roughly is about $1,000. So within $2,500, you can raise and process and package and store over, what do we calculate? Over 250 pounds of protein in 55 days, right? In 55 days. You raised it, nutritiously dense, right? It's locally harvested. It didn't have to go anywhere else. From out there to over here to back into your freezer. And the next day you were probably consuming that, right? And you want to make that as small of an understanding as possible, so then that you can be able to share that idea, that opportunity, that system with other community members too. And that could be from raising apples to gardening to raising chickens to goats to whatever. But it's taking, right, that understanding and then even expanding, right, in processing, packaging, preserving other products from that first product that you raised.
Well, one thing that I find is quite interesting as you expand on what you guys are doing is that there's a certain cycle of life that's going on right at the same time, because you got the chickens, and you move them around, and then the chickens are not only eating stuff, but they're depositing fertilizer on that soil, which means that could be a place where you could grow, or you either find a way to collect that. But whatever, however you do it, you know, there's a certain cycle life there, and then that's reconnecting to like your place in nature in a way.
Mm. Yep. I mean, that's one of the most powerful things is that reconnection. The
Mm,
thing that I know and that I understand, I learned from mentors, right? I learned by doing, by raising these, by taking these classes and stuff and doing the research, right? And building a team and building an organization that wants to focus on these systems, but at a system level, because most governments, right? Most management programs, right? They operate under programs. And what we are trying to do is to be at a level of operating systems towards
mm,
understanding, towards development, and towards shared understanding of systems rather than project or a program. We have to work up towards those next levels at each level. And so we
mm,
operate 5 strategic initiatives, both
mm,
with creating place and space as in a multi-purpose community food hub,
mm,
right? Um, uh, creating, we have a production farm. So we have 40 acres of farmland we're developing the next level of scalable systems for poultry production. So it's a
mm,
production farm that
mm.
has access to a mobile poultry processor that we're moving to be probably the first federally inspected facility in the country on Native American lands, right?
Wow. Wow.
We have the
Didn't
food.
it, didn't it, didn't the weren't the Cheyenne at least trying to do that years ago with buffalo, and they had this movable slaughtering plant. I don't know if they ever got federally
Cheyenne
inspected.
River. Cheyenne River.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if they ever got federally inspected, but I know that they were one of the groups I was trying to hope that they got federally inspected.
Yep. So that's another thing that we're taking up is actually is that we have access to a mobile poultry or a mobile buffalo processing plant too. So it's another thing.
Okay.
So
You,
as we create this loop, right? This
yeah,
local loop, we need access to processing plants. We need
right.
access to storage facilities. We need to educate and train, right? And so that's what the strategies are rooted around.
Mm,
They're this ecosystem of strategy, of systems of development and design
right.
that we implement, that we share, and that we showcase. And so we're looking at market access, we're looking at lands, we're looking at processing and packaging, but storage is the big issue in most communities, right? Is access to storage. If you harvest an animal, where can I hang? Where can I store? But also, where can I process it down, right? And so
Right.
you have movements of a lot of processing plants, of a lot of delis now that we want to make this food, right? These consumable food products that we see being ranged or being raised to be able to come back to a local sense of delis or grocery stores that are creating this access to these local foods.
Well, distribution of products is one thing, but I'm thinking it leads me to talk about or wonder about the distribution of ideas. As you're well aware, there are 9 different reservations that are spread around the state, and it sounds like these are ideas and efforts that all of them, not to mention those are off the reservation, those of us off the reservation, could benefit from.
Hmm.
How can these ideas spread, or how are you spreading the ideas? Maybe it's already going on.
It is of the 5 initiatives that we operate, we have one that is called the Ocheti Shakoi Food Systems Alliance. And
Mm,
so this is where I get back to understanding what nation, right? The nation we follow and as sub-band tribes, as
mm,
sub-band tribes, as sub-band communities. And so we created the Ocheti Shakoi Food Systems Alliance. And so the alliance is designed to be this network and this transfer and this share of this information towards understanding policy development, right? We want to understand policy development in relation to land access, into food codes, right? What are food codes to a general population of community members, right? What does market access look like, right? What is water access? So all of these things, right, that you're not going to learn from a book. You can go in any book, right? Unless you actually learn these, learn these specific things in like law school or economics or business development. Your understanding is very, very selective to one mono focus of information. But when you come back into your community, you're blown away because you see all of these policies, these procedures, these acts that you have to be able to navigate through. And so within the alliance is being able to understand, well, how do I gain access to land to build a house? How do I how do I create a business lease, right? How do I understand food in a sense that we want to make it food safe, right? That is not managed by big ag. In order to make it local, you also have to understand food codes, creating safe space for foods, by way of facilities, right? Because you have to create things that are food safe, but also you have to create facilities that they can educate and train. And so a lot of that, a lot of those factors come into play, but being able to share the information out, we do it by way of multiple medias, of being able to write articles, of accessing information on our website, of creating studies, of creating scans, we have podcasts. We do a podcast, right? We do informational sessions with climate change, our water, our soil, and we do partnerships. And so we do that all year long. And then in September, we'll be hosting our third annual convergence. And so convergence basically is a platform of local backbone organizations who have an allied focus of rebuilding a local food system. And it's a platform, right? It's a conference. Be able to highlight, to share what you're working on and what we can partner on, or what we can advocate, right, for on a grassroots level. And so this year we'll host our third conference here on the reservation. And it's the only conference held on this entire reservation to date. But our intent is to create a model that we can share with other reservations, right? Other native communities or underserved communities, or just communities in general, who want to create a platform to highlight what they're doing within their communities. So then that conversations can take place. So that ideas and thoughts can come to a circle, right? And be able to expand from there.
We're getting down to the last part of our program. This hour really went way too fast, man, because there's a lot more stuff that I'd like to pick your brain about. But I want to open it up to our esteemed panel here. I see one of my colleagues, Tamara, has joined joined our conversation, and maybe she has questions or contributions. But Vicky looked like she's chomping at the bit. I know she's got some wild question to ask. Go ahead, Vicky.
I live East River, but when I go West River, I looked at some of the crops when I'm going on 212, and I thought the moisture and the soil. I'm not that familiar down near Pine Ridge, but is the soil good enough to grow all these things? Do you have to amend a lot of soil? What about the moisture and the wind? And I mean, if you go far enough, the badlands really can't grow anything there. So how's your soil and your temperature conditions for? Isn't that a real battle? I mean, I always battle with my garden, a deer, and not enough rain or too much rain or hail or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And those are the things that we battle with every year as we do a lot of the work that we're doing. But it's also understanding, right, the ecosystems of which we want to connect to. And we're not implementing any strategies that are mono-focused, right? Our strategies is on creating diversity, but using more of the natural landscapes of what already exists. So it's being able to look outside and say, oh, hey, we already have maple trees, we have buffalo berries, plums. All we're doing is expanding, right, those ecosystems out and integrating different species of animals that could exist in those systems also. But for where we live, right? So in the Great Plains, it's more range, it's more designed to handle large grazing livestock. And here on the reservation, we are a large livestock grazing operation. So we have a 8 or 10 to 1 operation of cattle to bison, and we're trying to raise the bison population, because that's what normally ranged the lands on the Great Plains, is more of the bison. And so when we talk about soil development, right, when we talk about the science of all of the rhizomes and the quality, we first have to look at what naturally grows here, what existed before that, because if we look at the monofocus, right, of corns and sunflowers and wheats and all that kind of stuff, we know that deteriorates the soil more than it actually builds up. And so our focus is more of implementing the natural ecosystems that we know thrive. And those are the only systems that we're interacting with, is more of the natural systems. But we do understand that amendments need to be implemented on the soil that we interact with, but we do that by utilizing the species that already exist there. Oh, let's put more animals on there, or let's develop more trees, because each one of those has different properties towards that building, towards that soil structure. But we've been designed to say, well, let's get more fertilizer, let's get more of all of these, right? All of these modern amendments, and to say this will help us, right? It does if you're focusing on monoculture crops, but we're not focusing on those things. But we do need those as we feed other livestock and animals. But our intent is not to focus on those things. It's to be able to take what naturally occurs and expand that. But we seasonally, the issues are with weather, right? We're going through a climate change. We see weather patterns. I see winds coming from the east now, even more from the south, right? And so it makes you think like, oh, how do we design these structures? How do we prepare for these factors? And so those are all things that we take into play. But our first and foremost is to understand the ecosystems, the ecologies that naturally exist, and expand those thoughts and those properties in a more natural, holistic understanding. So that was a great question.
Is it possible, there's areas that, I forget what they call it, desertification, whatever it is, that the land is eroded and it's dry, and they put in really hardy, fast-growing trees. And then once they establish those and they use very little water, then they put an understory of crops. Have you seen that? Is it
Yeah, no.
possible to do that in more of the arid areas, or is it possible to really change the environment with trees first, then understory, and then you get your compost in there and you build it? Is that anything that could work in South Dakota?
Yeah. So to add to that question of growing in the Badlands, at my last organization, I grew on the most clay impacted soil. Okay. And so with the introduction of utilizing chickens, I was able to build up the soil. So I layered it with like wood chips and straw, and put grass in the seed, put grass on the ground. But I also row crop, what you call agroforestry. I row cropped these aisles to create a canopy for the chickens.
Oh, okay.
Chickens are a jungle fowl. But within that disturbance, within that development, I built the soil up. So now I can go out there and I can drop a seed and it'll grow something different, because I was able to I was able to expand that ecosystem further from where I know it actually developed, where it actually grows. And it in that space, I was producing like tons. I would probably say hundreds of pounds, if not thousands of pounds of cherries that roughly would grow by the creek. I was growing in clay, in thick clay that I helped develop the soil and the chickens fertilize. So we're talking about using the more natural, more natural elements of interacting with soil development, and then creating this lasagna of ecology right underneath the soil. And so I can say it's been done because I've actually taken clay soil and made it viable to grow crops on. And it exists today as the tallest, probably one of the tallest fruit-bearing bush trees probably on this entire reservation that is growing in once what was hardy clay.
Yeah. Well, we're getting down to our final stretch here. And I want to make sure that if there's a key thing we're missing. But before we get to that, Sharon put in the chat that she's going to be doing a poetry open mic reading in Mobridge. Where is that going to be, Sharon? You got to turn on your mic, otherwise we just see your lips moving. No?
One of these days you'll be lip readers. It's going to be in the library,
Okay.
in the A.H. Brown Library. You did a
Yes.
gig there also a few years ago, or a couple of years, or how many years.
Yeah.
It would be great if anybody's in the area to stop by.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask a quick question? Only
quick, because we got down to 4 minutes.
Okay. I was, when you were talking about the chickens, I thought of of stories about little boys and girls who tend chickens, and then they are presented with a chicken dinner that night, and oh, that's Charlie, I can't eat this. And then I also thought about the stories and history I've read of the Lakota and the importance of the bison to them. And before they kill the bison, they recognize the significance of the life that the bison gives us, them, the eaters. And so I'm wondering if you do any of that type of thing. Not that you have a ceremony, but if you continue to recognize that.
Oh yeah, we do that with all of our food. You know, we give praise, right? We thank that which was created, you know, and that relationship that we built. And the thing I teach my sons or anybody is that we have a relationship to this food, but we have to understand what that actually means, because food in all understanding is medicine to us, right? But in that historical and conceptual understanding is that we have a relationship. We have to understand what that relationship actually is. So then that we don't create these disparities. We don't create these pandemics, right? We don't create this disconnectedness. We have to truly understand what that means and take care of everything from which that derives from: the soil, the water, the ecosystems, the animals.
Well, we're getting down to our last 2 minutes, and I'll give you one of those minutes at least, Nick, to talk about anything that we missed. One of which I think is, how can we help you?
Well, yeah, no, I thank you guys. I thank everybody for participating, for being on this discussion, on this interview. I thank you for the opportunity, and I want to highlight that how do we support, right? And I think it goes around across the table is just that. Support those community efforts, right? But do it by way of being hands-on and sharing and advocating for the work that is happening. And hey, I'll take a check and a donation too, like everybody. But I do want to highlight that as communities, right? As community, as grassroots movements, the things that we are doing is the things that we see that we need for ourselves. And being able to support that movement from a grassroots and community level is huge, and advocate for that. And so that's basically what we want as an organization is I'll take the dollars, but I'll also take the advocacy and sharing the work, because the ideas can also probably affect another community who are looking for those solutions or those systems too. And so that's kind of
Right.
what I'm saying.
Thank you again, Nick, for joining us, and thanks to everyone else for joining us. We hope you'll come back next week, same time, same station, where we'll be talking about another brainstorming idea. Thanks, and see you next week.
Bye.